Hi everyone, this is Chris from Milkeep, and today we will be giving a general overview about how to prepare your logbook, because bottom line, in order to apply to the airlines, no matter what service you're coming from, you will need to convert your flight hours into a common civilian language. Now let's get started. Logbooks are probably the most confusing aspect of prepping for your airline applications and getting ready for your interviews. Here's why. You likely have some combination of paper civilian logbooks, your military flight records, and electronic logbooks. To make matters worse, the military calculates flight time differently than the civilian aviation world. Also, the military doesn't track the same categories of flight time as the civilian world either. Finding a way to combine all of these hours in an accurate and consistent way can be a nightmare. The good news is that most companies put more trust in your military flight records than other sources of flight time. The bad news is that the onus is on the applicant to convert those times to a generally accepted language and ensure their logbook closely matches the hours presented in their application. Most airlines are sticklers for accuracy, neatness, and consolidation. Each one has different reporting requirements, specifically how they would like the hours presented on your application. There are several different ways to get there, but there must be a logical method that you can defend for your conversions. And the logbooks you present in your interview must match what you submitted on your online application. So, what is a military pilot to do? Unfortunately, it truly depends. Why? Because the 14 CFR section 6151 outlining pilot logbooks gives zero guidance on converting military flight hours to their civilian equivalent, no matter what branch of service you're in. In a perfect world, you've been tracking your military flight hours in a civilian format along with any civilian time you've accrued using an electronic logbook platform. You will have your military records to back this up, but your logbook printout will be comprehensive, accurate, and very professional looking. Unfortunately, many of us never endeavored to log their military flight time in their own logbook. Even if we had, we probably didn't use an electronic logbook or any civilian method of categorizing it. Now on the left, you'll see all the different types of military component times you logged while you were flying for your service. What we want you to focus on now are the 5 types of civilian component times you will need to convert your military records to in order to complete your airline applications. They are pilot in command, or PIC time, second in command, or SIC time, instructor time, dual or student time, and other time. First, let's take a look at what the CFR actually states regarding the most important type of time in your application, and that's pilot in command, or PIC time. The Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, provides multiple instances for when a civilian pilot may legally log PIC time. However, the airlines only consider PIC time as the time where you were the person that signed for the aircraft and were solely responsible for the safe operation of the flight. If your name isn't on the bottom line for the aircraft or the flight plan, you should not count that time as PIC in your applications for airlines. The largest gray area detailed in this section of the CFR is Section 4, which allows students or other pilots to log PIC when acting as a PIC under the supervision of another qualified pilot in command. In those instances, it is advisable to take a conservative approach and log the time as dual or student time. It will only be a small fraction of the overall PIC total and not worth risking a potential job offer for not presenting your time or your PIC the way the airlines define it. Second in command time, or SIC, is basically defined as the time that you are flying, but you are not the pilot in command. But when you look at how you calculate SIC time, there are 2 important factors you need to consider. 1. When you fly in a military 2-seat aircraft, which only requires 1 pilot by the aircraft's type certificate, like a T6 or an F-18, you technically should not log SIC time because the aircraft only requires 1 pilot. 2. A common mistake is to allocate a percentage of your total time to PIC and then just throw the rest of it into SIC. As you know, not all types of military component time require you to be behind a set of flight controls. So, if you are using a percentage to calculate PIC and then just throw the rest into SIC, you may be logging SIC time incorrectly when you are not at a primary set of controls. Next up are instructor and evaluator time, also sometimes referred to as dual given in some civilian logbooks. The CFR says that a certified flight instructor may log pilot and command time for all flight time while serving as an authorized instructor, which is probably why you don't see a separate instructor column on your standard Jeppesen civilian logbook pages. However, the majority of airlines do like to see it broken out separately from your PIC time, and they count 100% of that IP or EP time as PIC. When you start filling out your airline applications, you will notice that there is a separate input field specifically for instructor time, so it's a good idea to keep track of it. If you have any evaluator time, you typically place this in with your instructor time if there isn't a separate evaluator input field. Now, let's go to the other end of the spectrum. The pilot logbook section of the CFR does not discuss when to log flight time as dual or student time at all, but it is listed on Jeppesen logbook civilian pages as dual received, and all major carriers typically want you to denote how much of your time was flown in a student status. Most pilots allocate their total time in military pilot training towards dual student time, as well as any time getting your civilian certifications like your private pilot's license or your ATP. The one exception is any solo time you have had during your pilot training. In that case, you obviously get to log PIC time because you were the sole occupant of an aircraft. The last civilian component time you need to consider is other time, which is specific to the Air Force, but also known in the Navy as special crew time. The CFR doesn't mention this type of time at all because it is defined as the time logged when you aren't behind a set of flight controls and you aren't instructing or evaluating either. You're essentially a passenger. The airlines are interested in how much of your time is other time because they don't place much value in it at all. In fact, some airlines specifically tell you not to report other time in your flight totals. One very popular question for Air Force applicants is what to do about other time for sorties where you were the pilot in command. Some pilots choose to be conservative and remove other time completely from their totals. Some choose to categorize the other time as PIC when they were pilot in command. And this is totally justifiable, because if there was an incident where you were the aircraft commander and you were solely responsible for the safe operation of the aircraft, you aren't allowed to tell the investigation board, well, I wasn't logging PIC time when that happened, I was logging other time. If you sign off for the jet, you are responsible during all phases of flight, so you should be able to log PIC time. Next, we're going to talk about the two most widely used airline application sites and how they want you to allocate those 5 civilian component times we just discussed. The first of the two major application sites is AirlineApps.com. They host application services for more than 25 companies and organizations, most notably Delta and United. As you're entering your flight times into AirlineApps.com, there are two major things you need to keep in mind. One, the most important phrase to remember is make it all add up. That means that all of the 5 civilian component times that we just discussed should add up to your total time. Second, there are also 2 separate types of PIC time going on here. Basic Aircraft Commander PIC in the PIC block and Instructor PIC in the Instructor Time block. You must separate out these times because the system will report an overall PIC time to their airlines by adding the PIC and instructor blocks together on the back end of the system. Like we said earlier, if you have any evaluator time, that should be included in the instructor block with your instructor time. Here's an example. If you're an Air Force or a Navy pilot and you fly a 4-hour sortie and log all instructor time on your military forms, your civilian logbook should only have 4 hours in your instructor column. You should not have 4 hours of instructor time and 4 hours of PIC time on your line entry. Otherwise, your times will be dual counted by AirlineApps.com when it reports that overall PIC time to their airline. Now, let's look at the other major airline application site because there are important differences you need to consider. PilotCredentials.com hosts application services for Southwest and American Airlines. They also used to host for FedEx, and although FedEx has since created their own application site, their accounting logic is built on the Pilot Credentials accounting model. The biggest difference between AirlineApps.com and PilotCredentials.com is that the PIC input field must include both your Basic Aircraft Commander PIC as well as your Instructor PIC. There's also a separate instructor input field which should hold only your instructor and evaluator time. So as an example, this means if you had 500 hours of Basic Aircraft Commander PIC, 400 hours of instructor time, and 100 hours of evaluator time, you should be putting 1,000 hours in the PIC block because it includes all of your instructor and evaluator time. And then put 500 hours in the instructor block. Another major difference is that there is no block for dual or student time. Because of this, you should be including all of your dual student time inside the SIC time block. Finally, there is no other time input field. So if you follow the make it all add up conversion methodology for airlineapps.com, adding up your PIC, SIC, and instructor time won't necessarily equal the total time on your military records. That's okay because pilotcredentials.com doesn't ask you to report a total time on the site either. So that covers the basics on converting your military flight times into their civilian equivalent, as well as a brief overview of the two major application sites that you will need to become familiar with. If you're interested, next we're going to dive into some of the service specifics, and we're going to start with the Air Force. The Air Force is incidentally the most difficult branch of service in terms of translating military component times into civilian component times. Here's a basic overview of Air Force flight records. The official system of record to store your flight history is the Aviation Resource Management System, or ARMS. Since ARMS was designed more than half a century ago, it does not have the capability to retain individual sortie data for more than 18 months. When the system purges in order to make room for new records, your old records need to be printed out and placed in a green folder. If you haven't already, this would be a really good time to digitize your records and have them in the cloud so they can't be lost, stolen, or damaged. Now, back in 2019, the Air Force switched from paper record management to another system called AMS. AMS is scheduled to hold up to 10 years of information, and it can hold more info than your old records did. Unfortunately, the most important thing it does not track is if you were the aircraft commander for any multi-seat aircraft sorties. If you did not keep diligent records to prove that you were the aircraft commander on individual flights, most pilots take between 80% and 90% of their flight time post-aircraft commander certification and allocate that to PIC time. Now let's talk about some Army specifics. The Army keeps their records in a digital format called the Centralized Aviation Flight Records System, or CAFRS. CAFRS creates multiple lines for each type of time that you log on any particular sortie. Here's an example of the columns that you'll see in a CAFRS download. You can see that there is one sortie on the 19th of February because the flight beginning and end times are exactly the same, as well as the flight hours. You can also see on the flight station ID, FSID, and hours columns the type and amount of time that was logged. Here, the pilot logged 1.5 hours of hood time and 1.5 hours of daytime. For the Army, your DSID code will identify whether or not you can log civilian PIC time. That's great, but until you go through all of your records and condense those lines into individual sorties, there's no way to quickly and easily summarize your totals. The Navy and Marines use yet another system called SHARP or M-SHARP for the Marines, respectively. As with the Army, it is advantageous that these reports are generated in a digital format. But yet again, the Navy and the Marines have different military component times which need to be converted. You can see here there's aircraft commander, co-pilot, and first pilot time. Fortunately, there is a type called aircraft commander time which does directly correspond to PIC, civilian-wise, and anything that is not allocated as aircraft commander time when broken out into the co-pilot and first pilot is something that will get categorized as SIC. There's also a section called Special Crew Time, which generally correlates to other time for the Air Force. It's time that you were not sitting behind any set of controls, and it doesn't really count towards anything. Some people like to allocate that towards civilian others. Some people do not use it at all. So, based on everything that we've talked about, we'd like to highlight 3 key practices to maintain your records in the digital world. 1, I know it's easier said than done, but strive to keep a personal logbook and keep it updated. Beyond helping you cross-check for annual record reviews, you can capture details that the military systems won't, like noteworthy events so that you'll have an easy place to reference when you need to recount certain missions to answer interview questions. 2, go digital now. 2 military bases were destroyed in 2018 and 2019 due to natural disasters, and the flight record offices went away with them. Pilots lost decades of paper records with no digital backup whatsoever. Creating a digital backup of your paper records is the safest way to ensure their safety. Finally, military records are a great source document, but you want your logbooks to be neat and professional. If your civilian logbook is presented in an organized manner, it will fall under much less scrutiny on interview day, and no one wants to do public math in an interview. The bottom line is simple. No one will ever care about your records more than you. That completes a basic overview of the different types of civilian component times and the major things you will need to consider when beginning to prepare your logbook for airline applications. There are a lot of regulations and company guidance you will need to follow, but no matter your service branch, MilKeep is the only logbook specifically designed for military pilots. We have a host of time-saving tools, not only for while you're still serving, but also for when you're ready to make the transition to commercial aviation. For more information about your logbook, please visit milkeep.com or email us at team@milkeep.com. Application and interview guidance changes frequently, so stay tuned for more important updates to this e-course. Thanks for listening.